So far, in 2018, I have messed up badly enough for my paramotor to touch the ground twice. This video is going to show you both of those. The launch you're watching right now is kind of just an example. It was a successful launch from the same day that I had a failed one. And if you look, if you don't know paramotors, you might not know, but this is a long run, really long run. I'm still running at this point. I touch down again. I run a couple more steps, touch, 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 and then I barely get up in time for me to turn left and avoid this power line. This is not an ideal launch. This launch is from the same day with the same wing and the same heavy loadout of extra clothes and oil and stuff like that. It was a long cross country that we did. But it's a little bit warmer, which makes it harder, makes the engine not work as well, and the density altitude is higher, so the wing doesn't work as well. But there's a helpful headwind, which makes things a little easier. And if you're unfamiliar with paramotors, this is a long run. I am still running at this point. A couple more steps. I think I take a step or two on the grass, I'm not sure. And then as I get this kind of decline, I begin to fly and take off. Those were both successful launches, but hard. I was making it look difficult all day long. And I thought maybe it was me because Ross was killing it. But let's look at the crash. All right, I'm going to play this one a couple of times as we look at what I did right and what I did wrong. So here's a quick view of it out of the gate. Run, run, run. Run, run, run. I'm trying to just, I'm doing everything I can. I've been at full power for a long time now. Normally on a paramotor, you'd have launched long before this. I am still running. I am still running. I am still running. A smarter pilot might have just killed it by here. But instead, I don't know what happens at the very end. I think, honestly, my legs just tucker out, and that's all I had. Let's take another look at this with some stopping at what I do right and what I do wrong. All right, we're going to watch at least part of this in slow motion. I'm pretty happy with my initial run. Like, I get a good tug on this thing. My hands are up pretty high above the center point of the cage. That much is good. Right there. I let go of the A's too early, I think. I could have held them a little longer so that the wing got overhead. But at this point, the wing is overhead. The wing is flying. And I'm not getting the lift I need, even though I'm at full throttle. So I add more brake. I add more brake. Adding brake gives you lift. And at some point coming up soon, there, too much brake. I have overdone it. And I recognize that. I can see that I'm sort of over braking this wing. So I back off and I let it fly again. In a second, I'm about to fly downhill. You'll see it. It's coming up. There. In this portion, I actually didn't run that. I kind of glided downhill. And even though I was at full throttle and gliding downhill, it wasn't enough to actually begin flying. Full throttle, downhill, some brake applied. I couldn't fly. I just kept running and running and running, thinking I could make this right if I actually did get airborne, and boom. To contrast, here's Ross on the same day doing his launch. You'll see he inflates it. He's also off the A's a little too early, but the wing inflates just like mine did. And he's getting lifted up, up, and away. That's what it's supposed to look like. So what went wrong? Like, how did I mess this up? Why didn't I fly away? I think there's a couple things that went wrong. A contributing factor was density altitude. One of the things that contributed to this is the fact that it was about 100 degrees right there. And I was about 1,000 feet at this airport. You know, the altitude was about 1,000 feet. So those two things added to making it a little bit harder to launch. I think the main thing, though, is the wing is worn out. We did some tests afterwards where we tried to launch it downhill into a slight headwind. Ross gave it a try, who you saw is perfectly competent at launching a wing, didn't get it. I gave it a try. This is at my house, and I got up. I had to run again. I got up. I had to run again. This wing just doesn't fly well. The lines are wearing out. I think that's the root cause on this thing not going like it should. I had it inspected in the spring, and they said, hey, the fabric is great, but the lines are wearing out. It's not safe to do sats on this thing anymore. Bring it back in 50 hours. We'll probably have to replace these lines. I would say I've put another like 20 hours maybe on the wing since then, but it doesn't lift. And I've noticed this happening over time. That it seems to be harder and harder to launch this wing. I thought maybe I was getting out of practice with it, but we ran tests, we switched pilots, we switched motors. It just doesn't lift like it used to. This wing has had the hardest life I know how to give it. I've taken 2 SIV courses. I've landed in a lake twice with it, countless dewy mornings, humidity here on the East Coast, and, I learned wing overs and sats and stuff on this wing. It's about 200 hours old. The fabric is great. The lines are worn. I think that's just where it is. It's out of trim. I don't know if I had pulled the trimmer some more or some less, if that would make it launch more easily, but at this point, I guess I'm just kind of losing enthusiasm for this wing until the line situation is straightened out. And I do sats every flight, and if that's unsafe, then yeah. I've always loved this wing because it's particularly good in junky air. It doesn't pitch forward, it doesn't roll. I can sit there and text friends in bad weather, but I loved it so much, I wore it out. And that's where this stands. Let's check out another crash. This is my other crash. I'm pretty embarrassed by it, but maybe we can all learn something. I'll break it down for you guys. So I'm coming in. I've got some obstacles on the field. And I make a turn. I don't handle it correctly. I skim my bottom on the ground. And then I even take a knee. This is the rare 2 crashes in 1 flight. Get on my level. All right, now I know I just made the first half of the video of me blaming the wing on my crappy launch. I hate it when pilots blame their equipment, or worse yet, freak winds. Oh my gosh, so many times in this sport, pilots are blaming these wind conspiracies. Oh, you don't know, the wind went straight down just as I was coming to land and switched up, and there was a very brief tornado at the time I was landing, and it's all nonsense. If pilots would just accept responsibility for when they messed up, they would be better. Now, I'm about to lay out all the things that I didn't compensate for properly, because that's your job as a pilot. You've got to deal with the things that are thrown your way. The biggest one is that the wind was light and variable. These are easy conditions to land under. I could have landed, the wind never went over like 2 miles an hour. I could have handled a straight up tailwind on this thing. But instead, I started at like 800 feet above the ground, thinking about what my approach was going to be, what I was, should I come from the east, the west, etc. And as the windsock changed directions, I kept changing my approach. I'll come from the west, I'll come from the east, I'll do whatever. And I shouldn't have. I prioritized this really light variable wind when I should have just prioritized like having a plan and sticking to it and being okay. So that was part of it. 3 other things. One, in the sort of the bottom center, you see that pole? That's a windsock. That was a thing that I had to avoid. It's an obstacle. I was glad it was there. You get to see the wind. I'm usually thankful when people set up windsocks. But in this particular case, it was something that I had to fly around, that I needed to compensate for, and didn't do a great job. The other, in the bottom right of your screen, is a pilot. I don't know if you can make him out, but he's got his wing laid on the ground and he's standing up. He's just past that, or just in front of the foreground in the, there's a goal post behind him, a goal. Anyway, so I had a pilot that I didn't want to run into, or I didn't even want to fly over. And I had a windsock, and I had changing winds. So somewhere at like maybe 80 feet off the ground, I get this idea that I'm going to like hook a 120-degree turn. I'll go between the pilot and the windsock and wrap it around, and I'll land on my feet like Tucker does all the time. I didn't pull it off. All right, so let's break this down. First, this is my idea of a silly approach. If I can pull a 90-degree or 120-degree like swoop landing if I plan it, if I have that in my head from the start. But I didn't. And I should have come from right to left in my screen if that's the direction I would have wanted to land. It would have been simple. It would have been easy. But instead, I come forward and decide to work this swoop thing without really having that in my head from the beginning. And my altitude was wrong and planning was wrong. All right, so where my head should be at this point, the pilot on the right, I've already dealt with that. I should be worried about my altitude. What I'm actually worried about is my wingtip hitting that windsock. It doesn't look close in this picture. It's really close in my memory. I don't know what's right. GoPros make everything look so far away. But what I'm doing is I'm staring at the top of that windsock, and I'm not paying close enough attention to my sink rate. And here it is. This is the moment of impact. I That thing that's at an angle in the back is my paramotor, actually. But what I do is I flare hard, and that tells me that I had enough energy left in the wing that if I had been monitoring my altitude properly, I could have pulled this off. But instead, I just didn't know I was as low as I was. So when I pull these two brakes, I actually go back up. I'm going to put this part in slow motion, but there, see? We get back up in the air. Look at that form. Look at that grace. And then crash again as I take a knee. Ugh. It could have been fine. It could have been fine. It would have been fine had I just monitored my altitude instead of looking at that windsock and applied the flare that the landing needed. But I was distracted. I was prioritizing the wrong things. If I could get this one back somehow, I know I'd hit this landing 10 times out of 10. I could have either just focused on my altitude as I did this particular landing, or better yet, done a go-round and set up a landing that had a lower degree of difficulty, like I normally do. Those are my takeaways. Those are my 2 bad landings from this year. Kind of embarrassing, but maybe we'll all learn a thing. This is me at my worst. I hope you liked the video. I usually say I like making it. I don't know about this one, but it is what it is.